Hello again. The Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance is again demanding justice for the 21 teenagers who died at Enyobeni Tavern in Scenery Park, East London. The alliance is also calling on President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa to ensure that legislation is tightened. Let's discuss this further now with Maurice Smithers from the South African Alcohol Policy Alliance. Maurice, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. I understand you had a press briefing yesterday, post this tragedy we've seen at Enyobeni Tavern and post the symbolic funeral, mass funeral just the other day. And you've been listening very carefully to what the president had to say about it. But you are not really impressed because you've been calling for some of these measures for quite some time, including raising the age restriction to 21 years.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, you're absolutely right. And to pick up on that, the president did actually talk about the issue of raising the age from 18 to 21, but that was already contained in the liquor policy of 2016, which was approved by cabinet, and is also contained in the liquor amendment bill, which was also drafted in 2016 and should really have been passed by now, but hasn't. And so, so that has not become law. But at the same time, it's good to caution against believing that simply changing the law from the age limit from 18 to 21 is not actually going to eliminate underage drinking, and it's not going to change the alcohol harm problems in our country.
So the issue of plans that are required to change the situation, you've been sort of discussing them and you've got ideas. What would they look like, these plans?
Well, we think, first of all, that we need a national strategy for dealing with the question of alcohol. And that national strategy should be contained in the liquor policy of 2016, but hasn't been implemented. But we also have a problem that when legislation is introduced, and a good example is the Control of Marketing of Alcoholic Beverages Bill in 2013, the reason why that was never even released for public participation, even though Cabinet approved it, was because there was so much resistance to it from even within Cabinet. So we need government as a whole to say we have a problem in the country, we have to deal with it. We all have to work together. We all have to make it happen. So we're calling, first of all, for a whole of government approach. Secondly, there used to be what was called an interministerial committee to combat substance abuse. That has fallen by the wayside over the last few years, and we are suggesting that be re-established as a national action committee to deal with alcohol-related harm, and that should be housed in the office of the minister in the presidency. Because another challenge is that when you house it with one individual line department, the proposals that they make are not necessarily binding on other departments. We also have written to the president calling for a very urgent meeting with civil society to discuss this issue. You know, we and you and I, as citizens of the country, and all our fellow citizens in the country, are the people who are most directly affected by the harm that is caused by excessive drinking, irresponsible drinking on the part of many people. And yet we have very little say over the formulation of that policy. So we are calling for a very, very urgent meeting with the president and members of the cabinet as civil society, and to meet and to say, how can we work with you going forward to ensure that we do have policies and legislation in place that is going to contribute towards creating an alcohol safer South Africa. We also are calling on the Minister of Basic Education to urgently withdraw a proposal in the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, which is currently before Parliament, which is suggesting that schools be allowed to sell alcohol and serve alcohol on school premises and at school functions in order to raise funds. You know, we have a situation with Enyobeni where we've got 13 and 15-year-old children who are going to a tavern to go and celebrate their pens down. And you have to ask yourself, how does that happen? What are the forces in society that have that have motivated, that have kind of driven those children to do that. And it's to do with advertising, it's to do with adult modeling, it's to do with peer pressure. And now having alcohol at schools in the mix is simply going to make the situation worse.
Okay, Maurice, before I let you go, you've also touched on, from what I understand, as the Alliance, the issue of justice for these teenagers. I mean, the youngest of which, as we know, was 13-year-old, as you've just said. What would you do in that regard? I mean, what form does justice take, in your view? Already the tavern we understand the authorities say it's been closed down, the license has been revoked for the operators, and they will never open Enyobeni ever again. What other forms of justice are you anticipating?
Well, what we would like to see is a national inquiry into the matter, because currently there's a lot that is said in the media about the responsibility of the children. Why were they there in the first place? They were bad children. Other people are saying, why aren't their parents controlling them? They are bad parents. People are focusing on the tavern owner. But what about the police? What about the municipality? What about the Eastern Cape Liquor Board? What about the provincial government as a whole? What about the national government? What about the National Department of Trade and Industry, which should have passed this legislation many years ago? What about Cabinet itself? Who knows what a problem we have? I mean, under COVID, it became very apparent to the entire country, Cabinet included, that we have a problem with alcohol in the country, and yet nothing has been done about it. So we can't restrict accountability just to the tavern owner. We have to have a clear understanding about how did Enyobeni happen, and what is the country going to do to stop that happening again? Because actually, one of the things that is very important for people to realize is that the only reason why Enyobeni has become such a national issue is because of the number of people who died and because they were all underage. But there are people dying in taverns every single weekend. And this is the issue that we have to address. The consumption of alcohol should not go along with an assumption that we are going to have this regular litany of deaths, of motor car incidents, of admissions to trauma units at hospitals, of gender-based violence, and so on. Alcohol is fine for people to use as long as they use it in a way that doesn't cause harm to themselves and harm to the rest of society. And it's government's responsibility to deal with that and to make sure that we have an alcohol-safer country. So that inquiry is what we are calling for, urgently.
Thank you very much, Maurice Smithers from the South African Alcohol Policy Alliance.